Our conversation today will be a fun one for me. Our topic being design thinking. And I can remember back to some leadership classes I took in undergrad that introduced me to this concept. And I feel like it's kind of really seeded into my thinking of how I just sort of operate as a professional now in higher ed, especially in higher ed tech, where I think there's just a lot of opportunity to think through how we're kind of creating experiences for students and all that. So obviously our conversation today will be mostly focused on how design thinking applies in the residence life context. But it's always an awesome opportunity to talk about this. I think it's just a really cool concept for folks that may not be aware of it or may be looking for kind of more tangible applications of it in their everyday lives. So we will start out having our guest introduce themselves and give a brief overview of their professional background, and then we'll get to everything else.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Erin Long, and I am the manager for residential education at the University of Texas at Austin. So I've been in res life for probably 12, 13 years at this point. I am kind of like I did not go through the typical route. I was never an RA. Um, Even though in undergrad I did live in for all 4 years, but I was never an RA. I wasn't involved in RHCs. I wasn't involved in anything within housing. But when I was getting my master's, I had my assistantship was with a living learning community on volunteerism and service learning. And so that's how I kind of got connected into housing. And so I've worked at several schools. I've worked at Presbyterian College, University of South Carolina, Radford University, where I was in sort of a dual role with both housing and our student success and retention. And I also worked with the NUN program out of Northeastern, where I got to work for a while in Ireland, which was a pretty cool experience. So I've also been pretty heavily involved in curricular work, and so that started when I was at USC was when we started designing and creating our curriculum there, and then when I went to Radford University, we were also working on that, and that's where I got introduced to design thinking. So Radford actually has a master's in design thinking, and one of my friends who worked in admissions, Mallory Griffith, she was doing that master's program and invited me to a design thinking like day where they were looking at a process in admissions and said, "Hey, like, can you come down and just be a part of this?" And I did, and it was really fun. I think was like the first thing that I thought of, and I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of think about the work that we were doing. So I actually invited her in the next time we were planning our curriculum or doing some of our curricular work, and so that is how it started. And now when I'm at University of Texas, I use it all the time. I use the techniques pretty often. There's kind of a joke when they see me coming. I always have Post-it notes, so we can do a lot of different of the techniques.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I found it very engaging, and fun as well. Because I think just if you're thinking through strategy and planning and sort of implementation for anything, like it's just a great tool or sort of like sandbox to kind of play in, or sort of just versus kind of I don't know. It could be fun also to do like free association, like brainstorming and all that. But if it's kind of like a bit more intentionality and uh certainly like consideration of the end user, which in this context being the students, is I think very very important. But just for folks who may not be aware, though, if you had to give sort of like an elevator pitch for design thinking, like a pretty just simple kind of definition, how would you try to kind of capture that in sort of its purest terms?
I would say it's solving a problem but using a really human-centered, collaborative, iterative approach. Like it's something where you're looking at something maybe very specific, and it can be like it doesn't have to be like a tiny thing. It can be something specific as creating a strategic plan, but you're starting with what is the human experience that your end product is going to affect, and really starting there and then working together. Like I think the idea is at no point in time is any one person's idea the only idea. Like it's really meant to be something where I don't want to say failing, but maybe some false starts along the way where you try a process and can do that really quickly. So you're like, you get a little ways down the road and you're like, okay, maybe this didn't work, instead of spending months and months and months on an approach that doesn't end up working.
I know one big part of it, like kind of what you're getting out of like rapid prototyping and everything, where it's just like, let's do a pilot, let's try something out to get feedback on it versus kind of like what you're saying, where there could be a situation where it's like, oh, we're doing like all this planning, all this prep, like this is the thing, we're going to do it and all that. And then it may just fall flat. And it's like, oh my gosh, we just wasted so much time and resources and all that. And now we may need to like reset and try again. Like, I think that idea is like again baked into it. I think that's probably gonna be the word I keep using, but just like there's a lot more intentionality. Like you're going to prove out an approach sooner than you might otherwise, and you're not again when there is value to like free association, like brainstorming, and let's just think about everything that's possible. You're trying to like do a dose of that, but then it's like, well, let's like try that thing and see if it's going to be something good versus assuming whether it is or isn't going to work and those sort of things. So um I guess just to kind of build off that, because I know like I think the chunk of our conversation will be like the another question that I want to ask, but like what is the impact of using a mindset like this? Like what do you see as some of the outcomes? Because I think we're sort of leading towards that, but I'd love to kind of hear your perspective and even maybe like anecdotes or anything I guess you can think of, but just sort of what comes to mind when you say like, okay, if we're going to use this mindset, like what's going to be the impact of that?
So I think first and foremost, it really helps do that thing that we all say we do where we're all saying we're student centered, but this we start with the students. Like that is the first step with is which is so there's 5 steps to the design thinking process: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And really when you're starting with the empathize, you're talking to the students, finding out what their experience is like and how you can build off of that. um, I think it really opens the door to this idea of being creative and being allowed to fail. Like sometimes it's great to come up with bad ideas, but then you can come up with good ideas, right? Like um and you're coming up with it in this collaborative process. So maybe like you're coming up with an idea that at face value kind of is like, oh, that's weird. But I'm like, but no, no, no. If you take this little aspect of it and we change it, you can make it into a really great idea. And so I think that's really an important part of it. And then again, it just makes it fun. Like whenever I go in and with my team or parts of our team and set up doing it, usually we oftentimes have retreats where a whole day is just given to this process. And everyone really enjoys those times. It's great. Like not only are you getting work done and really thinking through things, you're also just having fun with each other and building as a team or working together as a team. And so people enjoy it. Mhm.
The intentionality again is like a big part of it for me. But then, like you said, is like that's a way to engage using design thinking across the board is a way to engage everybody in the process. Because I think what I was thinking of when you're starting with empathize, which is like, yes, that's like such a crucial part of this whole thing is like whoever's going to be, uh, sort of impacted or sort of be using this process or platform or whatever else, like you should be starting with their input. Because I'm like, yeah, even if you're thinking that you're maybe doing this, you might skip ahead some steps and be like, all right, well, let's try a pilot and let's do that. It's like, hold on. Like, do you even know if that's like what people want or what they want it to be like and those sort of things? So like starting with there, you get so much great sort of fertile ground to then be like, well, here's all the things that we could do to sort of like solve that problem. And it can be applicable to, really big or small things. But the other part of it that's coming up to me now is that idea of like building, because I think that can be where some people get kind of exhausted with this process. It's just like we're like talking and talking and talking and planning and thinking, and it's like, on one hand it's like good, yeah, you're not just like shooting from the hip blind into the fog of war and whatever. Like, you're trying to kind of like, clear some of that up and aim a bit and take your time, but it's like you do want to start to get your hands dirty and kind of build something and do that together and just see how it works. So I think it is kind of blending, when done sort of the right way, like this whole sort of process of those 5 steps, I think creates a really good harmony of trying to balance all the different aspects of like what does make a good sort of project planning process of getting in that input, thinking through things, and um, getting feedback on what may be the best, solution to the original problem that you're trying to solve. So for I think the other part of this is like design thinking. Obviously, again, it can be applied to things big or small, in a variety of industries. How do you see this showing up in residence life in particular? I don't know how, like, if this is something uh, that you've had the opportunity to, like, implement for, a long period of time, or in a bunch of different, different institutions even, or whatever. But yeah, just thoughts and sort of, examples that people can kind of get inspired by.
Yeah. So when I first started here at UT, one of the first things we were still pretty on the ground floor of building our curricular approach. And so one of the first things that I did was we started with the empathize step, and we went to our RAA, so our Resident Assistant Association, and our URHA, and had them map out what it looked like a year in the life of a student looked like what kind of things did they feel, what kind of things did they do, what did they experience. And so we mapped that out, and that's kind of where we started. And then I took that back to our team and said, okay, here's what we see, like let's theme that, like what themes are we seeing, what things are we connecting to in this, and how does that work within our goals. And so from there we kind of built a thing, our curricular approach. And so, some of the ideas that came out was a lot of the things that the students were telling us about was, roommate conflicts. Like, and we all know that in res life, like that's not a surprise that students have issues with their roommates. But thinking about how that needed to be maybe something centered, and it was really a moment where we could help them learn some communication and conflict management skills in a really like concrete way, and we know that this is what they experience. And so we built some of our lessons plans based on that, and we've gone through them a couple times. So I think one of the things that's interesting is when you're using design thinking in an educational context, I think a lot of times it's sort of extends, it's a longer process, right? Because I think originally design thinking was to build products, and so we've sort of adapted that in education. And so I think a lot of times our lesson plans are our prototypes. And so we try it out, and then we get feedback from our RAs, and they tell us like this really worked or this didn't work, and then kind of expand from there. And because our RAs are involved in that feedback process, they've given us some really great ideas. We actually or this past summer created a video of like why a roommate agreement is important in the first place. And it was, the entire video is our RAs without any prompt. Like I gave them questions, and they just explained why it was important and gave so many great examples. And we now use that. We send that out to our students before they go into the roommate agreement process. And so I think that kind of also highlights how getting other people involved really just makes it better. And like you start with one, we started with the roommate agreement lesson plan, and we just kept building on it and building on it and making it better. And so I think that's one really great way we use it. We're currently going through a strategic planning process in our Res Life unit. And so again, we started right here. We had a whole day where we just did different techniques. So some of my favorite in those kinds of things is we do a rosebud thorn, which rose is like the things that are great that you're doing that are just wonderful. The buds are maybe those things that you're like, this has so much potential. Like I can see this being great. We're not great yet, but we can be great in this. And then the thorns are, okay, this is an opportunity for us to do things a lot better. And so we just start there, and then we start theming things and putting them together. And that ended up being what our goals were in our strategic plan. Is we did that process and came up with the 5 goals that we have. And then we sort of took it a step farther and said, okay, so kind of like, how do we do these things? And another one of my favorite techniques is called a statement starter, which you start with a question. So you're like, how might we improve our organizational culture? And then, so you just put it up on like, again, a Post-it note. I love my Post-it notes. Where, so you have the question, and one person goes and answers the question, and they have like 2 minutes. Like it's a real quick answer. And then someone else comes and does, what is the problem with that answer? Like, what is the problem with this idea that they came up with? And then someone else comes and they do, what is that? How do we solve that problem that someone else just came up with? And you do that like a couple of times, and you end up, it takes 20 minutes total, but you end up with this really fleshed out thought that it wasn't, someone sitting in their office for an hour or three, like sitting there and thinking about it. It was a group approach. You thought through all these different parts of it. And if you're doing multiple iterations of that at the same time with the same question, but different people with doing different parts of the step, you really come up with some great ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea of like, because again, like that's such a like micro thing of just like, okay, one question, let's just like try to break that down. Um, because I think, yeah, it's like that you're trying to distill something down to its simplest kind of terms, and be just really concise, but really complete and sort of full and all that. So I think that that kind of painstaking sort of like empathy in the sense of like trying to understand, like that's like is like you're trying to understand where is someone coming from, what are they feeling, why are they feeling it, and what can we try to do about it. And I think in that, that can obviously be kind of a rinse and repeat kind of thing across a bunch of different uh, things that are going on. But even just what you're saying about like uh, kind of having a continuous improvement like just if people don't, I guess, I feel like they probably can surmise from how we're talking about this, but like it can just be this sort of eternal cycle of like you do all that, you test the prototype, but then you just start right back to be like, what did you think about like this empathize, like, and just soak it all up again and just keep that process. So I think that's another beautiful part of this kind of architecture of problem solving and planning and all those other things is like, again, just its broad applicability, but then that it can be something that uh, really facilitates a continuous improvement approach um, to these sort of things.
Yeah, my team sometimes, I like to joke with them, there's nothing final until it's over. Like, we're at no point in time finalized until we have finished whatever the event, the strategy, whatever it is. And I say that because it's, if you have an idea in the middle of it, like definitely change it. Like we're always trying to make this improvement, and you never know when that is going to strike, or when you come up with a different idea, or when your RA says something that just sparks um, a way that you can improve the lesson plan or whatever that is. They don't always like it when I say that because they want that finalized version. I'm like, no, it's not final till it's over, y'all.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it's like we can say it's like final for now, like where because it's like again, yes, we could just stay here all day and just be talking about it. And again, you're gonna falling into that pitfall of maybe, how people approach this and other spaces. But uh yeah, I mean it my joke that I was gonna say is just like because some people are like, well, like this is just like it's just life, right? I mean, like it's like, yeah, so like it just never ends. Like versus like there's certain things where it's like, yes, this will be going on in perpetuity as long as this institution has people who live on campus kind of thing. But like other times it could be like, okay, we're using this to plan fall move in. It's like that's a thing that happened and then it's over and then we can sort of reset and then go through the cycle again of these steps to keep improving the process. But um yeah, I guess that was going to be something I brought up to sort of just flesh things out a little bit. Is just like if you've encountered confusion or frustration or any sort of pushback against using this, because I think it's just enough of a learning curve that, and you want to sort of set some like clear bounds to be like, well, let's not do it that way, or we're gonna move on to the next step or something. So like, have there been instances like that where you've need to kind of like keep people sort of within sort of the sandbox, and maybe they've like resisted this somehow?
I don't think that we've really had any outright resistance, and that might also be coming from a lot of this is I have a lot of support from our senior director and our directors to do this kind of work. They actually, they helped me get this certificate that I have from the Luma Foundation. Or the Luma Institute. And so they have a lot of support, or I have a lot of support from them to do this. I sometimes, when I get into the moments, there'll be parts of it that are difficult for people. They don't always like that. They usually like when you're doing either some of the brainstorming techniques, you're really limited in time. You're like, you get 2 minutes. That's it. Like, we're not trying, this is not, you're not thinking for an hour and coming up with this beautiful answer. And some people struggle with that because they're like, oh, I could think so much more. And I'm like, no, no, no. This is first thought off the top of your head. And not everyone is super comfortable working like that. I think it also, maybe the first couple times we did some of these things, I think there was a little bit of like, I don't really see where this is going. But now that we've done several different like iterations of this in several different ways, and I've gone to, I go to our conference and event services, and we do these techniques. I go to our occupancy management, we do these techniques. I do them with our res life team. um, they see that it goes somewhere. They see what they can get from it, especially once we get to that part at the end where we're having those like ideas, like concrete ideas that they can test. So sometimes in the beginning they're like, I don't really get why we're doing this. But once we get to that point where it's the ideas are coming and they're like, oh, this can make my life so much easier and I wouldn't have thought of this before, that's when they really get the buy-in. And at this point, enough people have had that at this institution that they trust the process, and they are usually excited when they get to do this kind of work with me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think like there's just the ambiguity, or I guess like the forced constraints, but that really is, I mean, just I think there's a lot of good examples of instances where uh, that is where like great ideas come from. It's just really trying to kind of put some constraints on, I guess time especially is usually the biggest one, but um and I think you can help shepherd people through that sort of like discomfort by, like what you said, like having people who are trained and well prepared to do this work, to facilitate these things. So like having the support of supervisors and colleagues, and doing your homework, and all that kind of stuff can really be um important here, are just just really helpful to have it go as smoothly as possible and be as effective as possible. So um you mentioned that certificate that you got. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but I feel like this is a topic and a conversation that is ripe for resources and homework, for folks to check out. So anything that you'd recommend that we could put in the show notes?
Yeah. So, yes, I received a certificate from Luma Institute. They are out of Pittsburgh, and they do online trainings. And so they have a couple different levels of certificates: practitioner and facilitator. And so they are a really great resource. I think the Stanford Design School has a great website with quite a few different um, helpful, like, they they actually have an entire PowerPoint that takes a group through how to do this process and really just even learn how to do this process, that you can download for free. And they have a lot of articles and different techniques on there. And this all started at Stanford. Like, they were the originators of this design thinking approach. And so they're always a great resource to go back on. Several schools just have programs. I talked about Radford having a master. I know here at Texas, we also have some classes and certificates that you can get. Um, so a lot of different schools have that. Um, Honestly, if you just Google design thinking for education, you can come up with some great resources. I just one day like randomly did this, and it was pretty early on when I was using this, and I was like, how do I make this really specific for education? And I found like this 70-page like PDF guide to how to do this with education. And it was specifically for like K through 12. But it was a really helpful guide. So just even Googling it, and there's lots of books out there that you can also get. I don't necessarily have a specific book recommendation, but there are quite a few resources out there. Mhm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, just obviously like those free points for people to start out, and yeah, they can maybe run through it and see like, wow, this like did work really well. I feel like I maybe need a little bit more support here or there, and they can kind of pursue other books or something, in particular uh, facets of the process, or things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what's wild is that. I mean, this for me was like during my senior year of undergrad. So that was like 10 years ago, where it's just like, yeah, like this was, I think, in its sort of nascent stages, just generally coming out as sort of a leadership philosophy for people. But now that has sort of matured over all that time, I'm sure, yeah, there's just any number of other resources and things that are tailor made for, spaces like education for folks to check out. So, um, yeah, that's some good stuff that we can include in the show notes. And yeah, we'll obviously have ways to connect with you as well if people want to keep the conversation going, ask any, follow up questions and that sort of thing. But, I think this is an approach that uh, has great applicability generally in higher education, especially in residence life. It is so, directly hands on, you know, working with students, needing to provide them, exactly what they need when they need it. So I think trying to strive towards a process, going through the phases of design thinking and everything, I think is just a great framework for folks to explore and implement into their department. So I thank you for, exploring it and sharing all of your knowledge and expertise and experiences and everything, and just hanging out for the podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.